everyone, this is Obscure Nick here with a new video, and today we will be discussing Miley Cyrus's third studio album, Can't Be Tamed, and why the industry buried this body of work. So as you guys all know, let's deep dive and thrive. So as many of you know, Miley Cyrus is known for Hannah Montana. She is the daughter of Billy Ray Cyrus, the famous country singer. And she is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, Disney Channel star of all time. From the show Hannah Montana ran from 2006 to 2011. And from there on out, Miley Cyrus had a career spanning many, many years after. As of recently, she released last year the album Something Beautiful, which is her 9th studio album. And Miley Cyrus has just become a legend, an icon to so many of us. We've all grown up with her and everything. However, Miley Cyrus' third studio album had a lot of hidden messages that I want to dive into. So let's talk about Can't Be Tamed. Can't Be Tamed started as a project that was announced in December of 2009. This was meant to be her last album for a while, and she was going to take a music hiatus to focus on films such as LOL, Laughing Out Loud, and So Undercover. Hollywood Records wanted this album to be more dance pop and incorporated, more sounds of Lady Gaga, Christina Aguilera, Britney Spears at the time, who were doing more of that electro dance pop sound at the time. However, a lot of what Miley Cyrus wanted, based off a lot of the songs she written, was more of a rock, edgier sound. So the two, dance pop and rock sound, combined as more of a dark dance pop rock type of album overall. The album started recording during the Wonderworld tour in 2009 when it was overseas in Europe, and then went into 2010 while she was in production for the final season of Hannah Montana, which she started working in January of 2010. She basically worked with producers John Shanks and Rock Mafia on many of the songs. And it was finished recording in early 2010. Then Can't Be Tamed, the first lead single, which is also the title of the album, released in May 2010, following with the video, which was her in a birdcage in a more darker, sexier atmosphere. People compared this video to a Britney Spears, Lady Gaga, Rihanna, and even similar to Christina Aguilera's Not Myself Tonight, which was released a month prior. This sparked controversy because this was right before the final season of Hannah Montana was airing, and this was in the last weeks of Hannah Montana filming. And the video was considered too racy at the time. And after this video aired, the next day, there was Radio Disney pulled the song. And I want to read this article that was in Pop Crush magazine at the time. So let's just read this article here. So on Twitter, this article from Pop Crush magazine was from 2020, and it was about, they interviewed a Radio Disney employee who worked at Radio Disney at the time when Can't Be Tamed first released. So let me read this here. On Twitter, Wednesday, May 6th, a former Radio Disney employee claimed that when they worked as a production assistant at the company back in 2010, the day after Can't Be Tamed was released, Radio Disney was allegedly informed by its parent company to cancel airing or promoting anything Miley related. In quotes, he says, "I'm not even kidding when I say that the next day after this dropped, Disney made us cancel everything that was connected to Miley Cyrus." User at Jose Onyx. No radio play, no mentioning her, nothing. And Pop Crush magazine that states that this is not surprising, consider this is how young women celebrities were treated in the 2000s. And, they were treated like they were not allowed to evolve. They were not allowed to grow up. And Miley was 17 at the time, about to turn 18, and she was just doing what any 17-year-old was doing. However, Disney's squeaky clean image at the time, it did not align with Disney Channel values. So from a marketing perspective, and all the parental complaints and noise that this made at the time, they had to cancel any promotion for this album going forward. And on the podcast, Every Single Album, Miley said that Tish Cyrus, her mom, almost got into a physical fight with the people at Disney during this time for saying nobody is requesting Miley. And at this point, Miley and Tish quit Disney Channel and Disney as a whole and Hollywood Records. And it was just so crazy. And the following month, on June 18, 2010, the album was released. She promoted it by performing in Rio, Good Morning America, and David Letterman. After this, the promotion for the project was not heard throughout the summer, and Hannah Montana's final season started airing. So it was only promoted pretty much for a week, and then it was not heard of. There was no follow-up single for a few months. And I want to dive into some of the album tracks here a little bit. When you dive deeper into this project, there are several album tracks that are Miley's most vulnerable work and most real work. Specifically, the songs Stay and Scars, I think, are some of her best, and they're about breakups and the back and forth struggles of going through the process and being with avoidant type people, and how when relationships are like walking on eggshells, essentially. And then there's also other songs that are sending a message, such as Liberty Walk, which is the perfect opening to this album because it's all about speaking out and speaking up and finding your own path and standing in your power, essentially. And that's such a beautiful track to open with, and such a powerful track to open with. That's the perfect album opener, in my opinion. And then we have darker tracks, which I think is one of the darkest tracks, along Scars and this other one called Robot. And it's insane to me that she released a song that has this hidden meaning of saying, Disney, you are not controlling me. And it was indirected at them while this was all happening when Hannah Montana's final season was airing. They were releasing this piece of work. And it's even crazier that Hollywood Records approved of this. Like, did they not catch on to the subtlety? Or like, what, from a marketing standpoint, how did they get this approved is my question. I would love to know the story behind that. And it's a track that reminds me of Britney Spears' Rebellion, which has a lot of, it's an unreleased track for Britney Spears' original Doll, which was going to be an album that had that was saying a lot of stuff about the industry, and then that project just disappeared. And what's even crazier about the song Rebellion in specific, where she's directly calling people, she's definitely giving a message about the industry itself. The producer suddenly died in like 2012 out of nowhere, which is a whole nother video, by the way. And it's also what I like about Robots calling out the injustices in the industry. And Michael Jackson did in his History album, he did a lot of that too, where he was calling out specific things like Tabloid Junkie and Money, and all tracks that the industry tried to hide. And again, looking at this was when Michael Jackson released those songs, very similar to Miley, is that his History album was considered not his best work or anything, and it felt like the industry was trying to push a narrative that Michael Jackson is no more, in the sense, at the time in 1995, because that was after the allegations of what he was going through at the time was happening. And it's kind of similar to Miley, where there was like a hate regime, it felt like, during this time, and just living through this period of time. And it's really interesting that this is one of the first times where we really see someone calling out these kids' television channels truthfully on full display, and releasing it under the record label that is with the kids' channel is even crazier. And it was really unheard of at the time, and we didn't really have open conversations about these things during this time period. We didn't have a Quiet on Set or the Me Too movement then. This was almost a decade prior. So it's really courageous that Miley truthfully released this type of music during this time. And another song similar to Robot that I would say has a similar theme is Who Owns My Heart, which is about taking control, but also breaking free from control. And it really, again, marketing is everything in this industry. So it makes sense why this album was covered up, because it was calling out the industry directly, which wasn't commonly known, especially with child actors and child singers. This was really innovative work, in my opinion. Miley took a lot of bullet shots that paved the way further for others to be more sexy, be more, not just sexy, but more so speak their truth, which is a very powerful thing, and it's a very hard thing to do at a young age. So you gotta give her tens for that. Who Owns My Heart was the second and final single to this album, which this single and video was only released in Europe in October 2010. Again, another dark, sexy video, one of her best songs and singles, in my opinion. And by this point, Hollywood Records and Disney was done with her. There was only a few Hannah Montana episodes left. And you know what's also crazy is in October 2010, how life imitated art in so many ways. There's a Hannah Montana episode during the season called Hannah's Gonna Get This, which is all about Hannah Montana changing her sound and image, and how the younger audience wasn't wanting to let her grow. And how she struggled with that, and how the record label wanted to have a focus group for Hannah Montana to see if her songs would get pushed out there. So it's an interesting episode to watch, because it really, and how this all aired in the same time frame too, and how there was a lot of Hannah Montana episodes which was about Hannah Montana changing her sound, which Miley was doing in real life. So it was interesting how the two connected. And then a month later, in November 2010, there were many paparazzi scandals that were happening. One that doesn't get talked about enough is about Miley pretty much cussing out a few paparazzi, telling her to leave her alone. There was one incident of Miley and Demi where Miley got pretty much mobbed by paparazzi outside a restaurant, and Demi Lovato was trying to tell them to just leave her alone pretty much. And she was struggling with that. And it felt like a media spiral, and all the paparazzi were just after her. And I'm so glad we don't live in a world where paparazzi culture is much of a thing, where we don't see this craziness. And it honestly is quite dangerous. It's quite dangerous to be living in that time, because it was physical. We do have social media and that being a whole thing now, but that's a whole other conversation. But at least the physicality of paparazzi culture not being to the degree anymore in person is, thank God, freaking God. We have to learn from Princess Diana and Anna Nicole Smith and Britney Spears, you know. But also in November 2010, another thing to mark is that Victoria's star Evan Jogia, she was dating him at the time. And there was a video that leaked from one of Miley's so-called friends of her smoking a bong onto the internet. And that was, again, whole controversy. Hannah Montana Forever was still airing at this time, and it was still a few more episodes to go. So we were really going through it with Hannah Montana and everything. For Who Owns My Heart, there was a remix posted in January 2011, right before the last episode of Hannah Montana aired. But then finally, in January 2011, Hannah Montana ended its series run with Disney, and Disney was officially done with Miley Cyrus. However, Can't Be Tamed was not fully done. And Miley Cyrus wanted to do an accompanying tour called the Gypsy Heart Tour in April 2011. And Hollywood Records was no longer supporting Miley Cyrus at this time. So this tour was funded by Miley herself, which is quite impressive. And it's a more smaller, intimate tour. There is a few costume changes, but it wasn't as much theatrics and costume. And it was more about focusing on the songs, which I think is a beautiful thing, because there's a lot of strong, beautiful, raw, emotional work in this body of work that deserves to be seen. And something to note about the Gypsy Heart Tour was in an interview with OK Magazine at the time, Miley stated that she did not want to perform in North America because she did not feel comfortable with how negative, there was a lot of negative reception with the public at the time, and the backlash for the imagery around Can't Be Tamed, and Miley just growing as a person at the time. And, you know, she only performed this in Europe, Asia, and South America. And this was a beautiful way to go out. I think the Gypsy Heart Tour is interesting. I think she performed a lot of wonderful songs on this tour, and I think it was great that she gave Can't Be Tamed some tour treatment that the industry did not believe in. And she performed songs like Scars and Robot and Stay and things of that nature. And a lot of these songs get justice. A lot of these songs got justice because Stay went #1 in South America 10 years later or so. And Miley sung in her bathtub the song Stay. And it's really nice that it shows how Can't Be Tamed has truly aged really well and how these messages stayed. And overall, Can't Be Tamed was a powerful and important piece in Miley Cyrus' career. I do not think she could have done bangers or Dead Pets or even albums like Plastic Hearts or Endless Summer Vacation or even Something Beautiful without doing Can't Be Tamed, truthfully. And in my opinion, this is her best work to date. It being recorded mostly outside of America makes sense sonically because it has a European sound to it. It has Euro house vibes to it in a lot of senses. It has hidden messages that the industry in North America would want to bury, and there wasn't as much openness with that. And I think what's important about this is that it opened a conversation for child stars in their music to speak about topics that they're struggling with in terms of the industry itself, in terms of corporate marketing. And this was an important moment in pop culture history where things changed in Miley Cyrus's career forever, and for how child stars could go about their work moving forward, and how transitioning from child star to adult star has a significance to it, and how this was the bullet shot that paved the way for many more child stars to come. And it's a lesson also in how big corporations can support us, but they are not our friends at the end of the day. And that's the biggest takeaway from it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know what you think about Can't Be Tamed as the overall work. What are some of your favorite tracks? What resonates with you? Let me know in the comments below. I'm really curious to know your thoughts. And what do you think about the way Disney and the corporations went about it? Okay, sending much love, and we'll talk again soon. Okay, bye.